All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. My name is Hallie. I'm a member of the Foundation Learning team. I want to welcome you all to this webinar on the ACT. We're going to give you a comprehensive overview. I have Marina with us today, who is one of our consultants, and she is going to help walk us through this topic. For those of you who don't know what Foundation Learning is, we are a company that helps students prep for the SAT, the ACT, other standardized tests, as well as tutoring for all other school subjects. Marina, can I have you introduce yourself for us before we dive in?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi there. Thanks everyone for joining. I am Marina, and I am one of the counselors here. And I really enjoy helping people as they kind of prepare for the various elements of your, high school, college journey. Obviously, the ACT and all the testing options are a part of that. And I'm a graduate from the University of Pennsylvania as an undergrad, and went to grad school at the University of Chicago. And just love helping students in whatever way I can.
Awesome. Thanks so much for being here. Great. So today we just did our introductions, but we'll go over some basics about the SAT. We'll talk a little bit about the history, what it is. We'll dive into the ACT sections and questions and go through the different question types that you might find and the sections. We'll go over scoring, and then we'll go over some ACT tips. We'll go section by section and give just a couple tips on how to approach those sections. And then at the end, we'll open things up for a Q&A. So if you have questions through this, pop those in the Q&A box, and we will get to those at the end. Additionally, we are recording this, and we'll be sending it out to you after this webinar, probably in a day or two. And you will have this to look back on as you need it, as you're preparing for your ACT tests. All right, so understanding the ACT. What is the ACT?
So the ACT is a very, well, not very, but it is an older test that was created back in 1959. It was created as an alternative to the SAT. And over time, it's evolved a little bit. In 2005, an optional writing section was added, probably similar in nature a little bit to what was being done with the SAT. And now it's an exam that is widely accepted across different colleges and universities in the U.S. It's one that many students choose to take. Some students will take the SAT and the ACT. Some might prefer to take the ACT. It's a good option as you think about kind of what pieces of your application you'll be focusing on.
It was really interesting to me when I grew up in the Northeast, and the ACT was definitely like the test people focused on. And it was really weird for me to learn that other parts of the country focused much more on the ACT, and kind of like the SAT had a little bit less of a focus. Obviously that's changed more recently, especially with test optional schools, but definitely a little bit of a regional factor in kind of what might be more prominent in your towns. All right, so sections and questions goes a little bit more into the understanding of the ACT.
Yeah, so sort of what you'd expect in some ways, right? You've got English, math, reading, science, and an optional writing. The time is distributed here, as you can kind of see in the table, with the most time dedicated for math, and then you've got English and slightly smaller chunks for reading, science, and writing. In total, without the essay, you'll be spending a little over, a little bit over under 3 hours. I'm doing the math here, with the writing a little bit more. So something you got to mentally kind of prepare yourself for. It is, it's a day.
It is. And something that is a little bit scary when you see it here is that sometimes there's more questions than, minutes allotted. So you have less than a minute per question. But I promise it's doable. And then just to point out the science section as well, the SAT does not have a science section. So this is something that you see in the ACT only, but don't worry, it's not testing like hard science, like facts. It's much more data analysis. Can you look at a graph and pull out information from it rather than needing to know like science formulas and things like that. All right, so English.
So English will be looking at your language skills, your writing skills. So things like grammar, punctuation, rhetorical skills will be multiple choice questions. And it's going to be a way to determine whether you are able to clearly express ideas. And make sure that you kind of learn some of those basic rules throughout your educational experience. Anything to add?
No, I don't think so. All right. So a couple different types of questions you might find here.
Yeah, and so it's interesting because you got English, right, and then you have reading, and we'll highlight kind of what the difference is there. But all of this is testing some of the skills that you've developed throughout high school, junior high, your educational career. There will be questions about usage and mechanics. So those will be things like grammar, the punctuation, sentence structure. And then there will be questions that look at your ability to organize ideas, to write clearly and in an effective way, to make sure that the point being communicated is clear and to the point effective, doesn't have a lot of like extra fluff around it.
All right, ACT math.
In the math section, as you would expect, we'll evaluate your math knowledge and your ability to solve problems. It will look at different math concepts that you've probably learned throughout high school. It'll ask you problem solving. It'll provide problem solving opportunities that apply kind of to real world situations. It'll definitely see a lot of like word problem type of things there.
Yeah.
These are some of the types of topics that we'll cover. So you want to make sure to brush up on this. It'll be pre-algebra. So you'll remember like the basic operations like, your addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, fractions, factors. Then it kind of goes through right as you did in school to elementary algebra, where you're setting up equations and trying to solve for x and looking at inequalities. Then it gets a little bit more advanced, and so you will need to remember some of the formulas that you've studied, but these are things that you've probably had a lot of practice with, and if you haven't, just you plan ahead to get that practice that you need, because you'll need to remember your quadratics and how to solve systems of equations. You'll need to also remember coordinate geometry, so that'll be questions around graphing, which would also be valuable to understand for like the science section. There's a little bit of like the skill sets apply across all of the different sections, but this one will be specifically testing your math abilities. Plane geometry, so remembering how to calculate angles and what the degrees are, triangles, quadrilaterals, making sure you remember how to do volume calculations, area calculations, things like that. And then there is a smaller part of the test that will look at trigonometry, which is giving me a little bit of trauma right now. Trying to remember all that.
Yeah. I think you covered that perfectly. So ACT reading, like Marina said earlier, it's different than the English portion.
Yeah, so this will be, that comprehension piece, making sure that you can find the main takeaways when you're reading and understand what the purpose of the section was, answer questions about it, making sure you're reading in a detailed way, but also taking away kind of main themes.
A couple of questions you might find here.
Yeah, so it's really nice, I think, to think about what the types of questions are. And even as you are kind of starting to study and practice, just kind of identifying in your mind, ooh, what kind of question is this? Because having that approach can help you to really figure out how to answer it. So you'll see that there are detailed questions, right? The detailed questions, you're going to be looking back through your text and trying to find that exact part of the passage that referenced something, make sure you're, double check you got it right. There will be main idea questions. Those might be a little bit, sometimes I always felt like those ones were the ones where I was, I felt like I knew, but I was also a little bit nervous that maybe I hadn't taken it away correctly, because you do have to infer the main idea. It's not just necessarily blatantly shouted out there for you. Well, sometimes it'll be pretty clear. But what is the main point of that passage? Comparative relationships. Looking for things like comparisons and contrasts and analogies within the text, and making sure that you're understanding those. And then cause and effect relationship questions, which you will be asked to kind of think about the cause and effect. Why did something happen? What was the result of it? And looking for those kinds of relationships within the text. But I do really encourage you to kind of think about the questions in that framework, because it makes it a lot easier to answer a question if you know kind of what they're looking for. So this is very helpful in the practicing stage. Anything to add?
I don't think so. You covered that well, and especially with the different types of questions. I guess I do have something to add. With the different types of questions, as Marina said, when you're studying, it's helpful to pay attention to those. And there's a lot of different study materials that will, after you take a practice test or go through flashcards, will tell you how you do on certain types of questions. And it's definitely helpful to practice the ones that are harder for you, even though you like the small wins of the ones that are easy. You'll gain a lot of strides in making sure you're focusing on the question types that you have a little bit of a harder time with. The more you practice, the easier they become.
Yeah, absolutely. You'll start to kind of identify those patterns.
Yeah, and we have a couple more different types of questions here as well.
Yeah, so generalization questions. In some ways, these test a similar skill to the main passage, or the main takeaway. What is the purpose of the passage? But it'll refer to more specific areas, potentially ask you to draw conclusions based on the information that was presented. There will be some testing of vocabulary to see if you understood certain words within the context of the passage. So definitely good to be brushing up on that, doing a little bit of practice with vocabulary. A lot of the times these types of questions really tested in context, so you don't necessarily need to know the word, but definitely doesn't hurt if you already do. Sequence of events questions. You'll be asked to kind of show your understanding of what happened when, what was first, what was next, and making sure you're really following the timeline of the passage. And then there will be questions that are related to the tone, the style of the author. And so they may feel kind of subjective, but you'll be using different cues and clues that you see within the text to be able to answer those.
Great. All right, ACT Science. I know I mentioned this a little bit ago, and we'll dive in a little bit deeper here. It's definitely one big thing that separates the SAT and the ACT?
The data analysis. I actually took both the ACT and the SAT, and I remember this being a very being challenging because I just hadn't gotten as much practice on it, since in the Midwest we also kind of study for the SAT like a little bit more. It's more common to take it, at least where I went to school, but you'll be looking at, like, again, it'll be kind of like passages, combinations of graphs, charts. I'll explain an experiment and then ask you to essentially be kind of scientists and evaluate what the experiment was about and what the conclusion was, et cetera, what the data is showing. So it's actually very good practice for life.
Definitely. And you don't need to worry about like earth science specific questions popping up and needing to know all of the names of certain types of rocks. It's much more, can you absorb this data and talk about what it's showing you?
So you'll be asked to interpret graphs and charts. That's the data representation piece. There will be questions that are related to like an experiment, research findings, making sure that you can read that and understand it and summarize it. And some questions that will even ask you to look at, potentially two different points of view and figure out kind of what the differences are, compare them, think about where maybe similar and where they're different.
Yeah, definitely, like, don't be scared by this section. It's definitely a little bit different than things you've encountered, but it's really manageable and doable. And I think part of what makes it hard is you get in your head about, oh, this is science. I don't feel like I'm good at science, or I think this is going to be hard for me. And so that will, can make you a little bit nervous and make it a lot harder. But these are things you've been learning how to do for your entire school career. And, a little bit of practice will go a long way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really great point, because you can almost in many of those cases kind of like think about it as like a different topic, like a topic that is easy for you. And if it's science, that's great. And if it's something else, that's fine too. But just kind of reframe the question a little bit, especially when you're practicing, to see what the parallels are.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of it, like, there's a lot of passages you'll read that you'll then have to pull out the main points or talk about the different sides of the argument, things like that, where it's really like another version of the reading section, just with a science theme and slightly different questions. All right, so let's talk about scoring. The SAT is out of like 2,400. The ACT is out of 36, which is a very different scale.
Yeah. So it is a very different scale, and it is the same scale that we had way back when I took it, which is sort of like a weird, comforting thing. Just hasn't changed in that regard. But first, what they'll look at is the number of questions in each section that you got right. Then that will be transformed into scale scores. And then you'll have the average rounded to the closest whole number. It's like a whole thing. And that will be your composite. So you'll get a score between 1 and 36. That'll essentially be, that composite score of the 4 different elements of the test.
All right, so let's talk about some tips. One thing that I really liked about the ACT was that it's a lot more straightforward than the SAT, where the SAT very much feels like you need to learn how to take the test to do well on the test, where the ACT, it doesn't feel like they're trying to trick you, and it's much more straightforward. Like, they're asking you a question and they want the answer to that question, and you don't feel like you're playing, a mind game, or that the questions are there to be hard on purpose to trick you.
Yeah. And I think that's like a good self-reflection moment, right? Kind of figure out which of these tests is a better fit for you. Some people are going to be naturally like better at the SAT, and others are going to be better at the ACT. And so definitely recommend taking kind of a practice one of each of these and figuring out which one feels easier to you, which one feels more manageable. Some people like that like tricky thinking, and then other people like to be able to do this kind of more like direct thing. And other people, you know, enjoy like the logical side of like the science section and kind of evaluating that data. Other people love to like study flashcards, and that might be more of, you know, an SAT thing. But it's a good opportunity to figure out which one is a better fit for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, we have other webinars where we talk about how you might figure out which one is a better fit for you. But I think we always recommend, you know, trying out both, see where you fall, see what feels better, and you can dedicate more time to that one. But you won't really know until you go in and do them.
Yeah, but as you prepare, you definitely want to have your formulas memorized. Definitely suggest like the way to go about that is go through your practice tests, and if there's a formula that you needed for a question, make sure it's on your, you know, study guide, and that you're practicing that a lot and able to pull it up into your memory without having to reference. You want to be able to do, you know, basic math without a calculator, just really for the sake of time, because you don't have a lot of time to answer each question. Vocabulary, like studying vocabulary, is always going to be helpful. A lot of the questions will be in context, but it's still really useful to have that extra practice, which I think you also do a lot of for the SAT, maybe like a little bit more in that sense. But, you know, flashcards, reading, all that stuff is going to help. And then really important, right, because you just want to understand like what that kind of test taking, like time pressure environment feels like. Make sure that you are timing yourself when you do your tests to see kind of like any patterns in the way that you address questions. Like, do you get hung up on something and then waste a bunch of time on it, only to then have to kind of go ahead and move and come back to it. So you really want to make sure that you're cognizant of how long you're spending on things, and when you have the opportunity to go quickly on a problem that you've practiced, like doing it quickly, making sure you've checked and feel confident and moving on. But you only have 52 seconds on average. So it's very important to just be aware of how long it takes you to answer most questions and where you're going to leave a little extra time. And then understanding the scientific method is really important as well. I think it helps in the science section, obviously, but it just also helps like in general with being able to understand like the questions that are posed to you throughout the exam.
Absolutely. All right. So English specific tips.
Yeah. So I feel like this gets trickier and trickier every year in a sense, because the way that we speak has evolved so much, and so many of our conversations are in these different spaces. But we still all take our English classes and everything, so it's good. But learn your grammar rules. Make sure that you remember where the commas go and when you have, you know, and but and all of that. You want to be able to closely understand transitional sentences, relationships between sentences, subject verb, things that maybe in our daily life we don't really think too much about, but you want to make sure that you can look at this and really be able to remember some of those key rules. Keeping your tense consistent, which I'm probably not doing right now, but that's another important one. Look for like kind of understanding what are the common errors that we make when we're speaking, will help you to be able to identify them. And yeah, also as you're doing the reading, making sure that you're trying to process all of the information, not just trying to pick out like parts of the passage to read to address the questions. You really want to make sure you're getting the context, because otherwise you could miss something critical. And then, anything you wanted to add here?
I don't think so. I think you covered it all really well.
Yes. Yeah. So we talked about this a little bit. Get your formulas memorized. You cannot bring a cheat sheet. There, you are allowed to bring a calculator, but you have to make sure it fits with the guidance that's provided. And you just want to make sure that you have really good practice turning word problems into like written out numerical expressions, etc. So turning language into math symbols. I feel like my son is just starting to learn that. He's 7, and I'm like, oh, wow, I'm just like pleasantly surprised to see how that process starts in your mind. But just make sure that you have practice turning word problems into equations. Like that.
Certainly.
And go ahead.
Oh, no, you can wrap up.
I was just going to say, like, make sure you're just practicing a lot, because the ones that are hard, all it takes is for you to figure out what the pattern is and do a bunch of them to see where like something might go a little bit differently. So make sure that you're practicing and you're really identifying those ones that are difficult for you, not just the ones that you get wrong, but also the ones that take you a lot of time, because you can get faster at those and figure out kind of shortcuts. And then for the ones that you are getting wrong, making sure you're understanding where you're getting them wrong, what's going wrong and how you can fix it. And what is sort of like your own strategy. Everybody has their own tricks to solving problems more quickly.
Great. And then I guess the only thing I would add for math is, a lot of this is what you've been doing in all of your math classes. But if you are in advanced math classes, make sure you go back and study this a little bit extra, because you're going to be a little bit further removed from the different formulas. And if you're doing a different type of math, if you're in pre-calc or calc, which aren't going to be on the ACT, you might find that you need a little bit of a refresher. So you might need to spend more time than you anticipate on math. So definitely don't assume that you did it, you're 3 classes ahead, you don't need to study it. Definitely take the time to look through everything, go back, do those practice questions.
Yeah, this is actually a very common thing that I see, is that students who are very good at math and are in very advanced math are always, not always, but often get their scores back on different types of tests and are surprised to see that they did better on like a verbal or English section than they did on math, even though their expectation was that they would do better on math. And a lot of it is exactly that. They didn't prepare for math because they felt like it was easy. But you haven't done it in a while, so you really need to go back and practice and get the patterns in place.
Yeah. And that goes for the SAT too. You'll kind of run into the same thing there. So just keep an eye on it. All right, reading.
I think everyone has their own kind of reading style. And so that's why, again, the best thing you can do is practice and figure out what works for you. One important thing is to remember that you don't need any extra context, so you don't need to panic if you don't understand what the topic is. Sometimes it does feel like the topics are very complex or something that you've never heard of, and that's okay. What they're really trying to understand is how well you do in trying to use the context that's provided to figure it out. Some people find it helpful to take notes. Other people find it helpful to circle things. I know a lot of folks that like do debate have like specific note-taking abbreviations, things like that. But do what works for you. You can go through the passages in whatever way makes the most sense for you, right? You don't have to do everything in the order that it's given to you. If there are certain types of questions that you like to get out of the way because they're quick and easy and give you a little bit of context, you can do that. If you like going from the main end, of course, like you can do that as well. You want to use the line references. It'll just make it much easier, especially to like go back and find something. And yeah, I do suggest taking some form of notes. You'll have to kind of practice to figure out what works best for you. But as you go through that, you know, circling, underlining, writing down a keyword, those things can be productive and save you time.
Absolutely.
Yeah. In science, it does feel like there's, you know, we sort of alluded to this, there's overlap in skills, right, between the different sections. There are similarities to the reading tests, and like we just talked about, you don't need to worry if you don't know about what the passage is talking about, or if it sounds very complicated and very scientific and uses language that's tricky. You really just need to take your time and process the information. It can be very helpful to look at the charts and the visualizations up front, because those are typically highlighting some of the most important pieces, and then you can use the other text to help you understand what they mean. But you're going to be asked to analyze the data, so make sure you take a peek at it immediately. Again, understanding the scientific method and just practicing so that you have a good sense for what approach works for you to cover the section.
All right, so that wraps up all of the information that we have for you. It's definitely a solid overview of the ACT, and in future webinars, we'll go into more specifics into each section. So keep an eye on our website for future webinars on that. But if you have questions, pop those in the Q&A box, and we're here to answer those. Marina, do you have any other advice that you would give to your students who are preparing to take the ACT, or thinking about whether or not it's something they want to take?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think maybe if I were to think about kind of three key things, one is try the ACT and try the SAT in as close to a real life situation as you can, to see which one feels like it will be better fit for your skills, right? And for your style of learning and reading. Obviously, you also want to talk to the counselor at your school and others to figure out if certain schools require different exams or if one is more beneficial based on what you want to study, etc. But I definitely recommend taking both of them in as close to real life conditions as you can, and getting a feel for which one your strengths might come out more in. The second piece I would say is start early, I think, in terms of preparing, and don't, try not to wait until the last minute. These things are, I find like a lot of people kind of like don't think they're good test takers. And I 100% believe that some people just like are very blessed to be very good test takers. But I think that everybody's capable of becoming a really good test taker. And sometimes you just need a little bit more time and a little bit more practice. So make sure you're giving yourself that time, right? You don't need to like cram and stay up all night. Just start a little bit earlier would really be my suggestion, like a little bit at a time, make it a habit, do 5 minutes here and there, so that it's more manageable. And then the third piece, just when you are taking these tests, make sure that you've slept, not just the night before, but really like the weeks before. Just make sure you're practicing. I don't know, it sounds like, I don't know, like I don't understand that like the cool young kids like can go without sleep for a minute, but truly like it's very important that your body be in good condition to take these types of tests, because otherwise you're going to make mistakes that you're going to feel kind of silly about later because you're exhausted or nervous. So make sure that you're practicing like good, healthy habits as much as possible before then. I know that can be really hard in high school, but I do think that it really helps.
I think all of those tips were spot on and so important, especially the sleeping. Sleeping is so important. And especially these tests start pretty early in the morning. So practicing in real life or like as close to real life situations as possible. Wake up early on a Saturday and spend a couple hours doing this before you get on with the rest of your day. So you know what it feels like to be tackling these questions at 7 a.m. or 8 a.m. rather than 10 p.m. It does help to get your brain acclimated. All right. Well, I want to thank everyone for joining us. Keep an eye on that email inbox. We'll be sending a recording of this. And don't hesitate to reach out to us if you need some tutoring help for the ACT or want to know more about how we can help you with other classes or the SAT. And then keep an eye on our website. We'll be adding new webinars in the new year for you to pop in and see as well. Marina, thanks so much for being here. It was great to see you. And I hope everyone has a great rest of their day. All right.